So welcome to you all for this conversation, this workshop. As each of us knows, internal conflict can be detrimental to the health of congregations and to communities. We will explore effective leadership strategies for conflict transformation by considering the role of cross-cultural engagement in this work. First, I'd like to introduce you to three of our finest leaders who are helping with this conversation. Megan Foley, at my far right, serves on the Congregational Life staff team for the Central East region. She has a background in diplomacy and sociology, and she's taking on the role of lead starting next month. Thank you for joining us, Megan. Carlton Elliott Smith also serves on Congregational Life. He's from the southern region. He's also part of the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalist Organizing Collective, and he is the primary contact in the southern region for justice work and compassionate communication facilitation. Carlton, we thank you for joining us. Reverend Dr. LoraKim Joyner. She serves as co-director and wildlife veterinarian of One Earth Conservation. And aside from that, she's a member of the adjunct staff team from Central East Region. She's an expert in compassionate communication, which she teaches to seminarians in Meadville, Lombard. Thank you for joining us, LoraKim. And I am Hope Johnson. I serve as also Congregational Life staff half-time, where my area of expertise is conflict transformation. I also serve as minister of our congregation in Garden City, Long Island, New York. And we are just glad to be here engaging in this conversation. Thank you. Now, we're coming at this from different perspectives. Included in the threads that have been woven together for today's conversation is one that comes from the book Salsa, Soul, and Spirit by Juana Bordas. It gives new perspectives in leadership that are inclusive of the Latinx, Black, and Native American communities. It is by no means inclusive, however. It offers a good start in new ways of thinking about leadership in this multicultural age. The other thread comes from Marshall Rosenberg's original work in nonviolent communication. Let's begin. LoraKim, with your wealth of experience and expertise in leading congregations to right relationship and conflict transformation, what can you share with us as we begin this conversation?
Hey. Hi. All righty. So I'm not an expert, but what I am is I'm a facilitator to help slow us down so the wisdom of compassionate communication can come through. So one of the questions is, what is nonviolent communication, and what does that have to do with cross-cultural and conflict work? We only have 10 minutes, right? So here's the bottom line. Well, there's two. One is, you are beautiful and so is everybody else. And number two, translate everything into feelings and needs. And by needs, I mean motivators or desires that are common across the universal spectrum. And that's what the practice is to translate everything into needs. So there's a couple tips on this in congregational work. One is it's very simple, right? Just translate everything into needs. So for instance, you all are here today. What's a need? Why are you all here today? Inspiration. Did I hear a learning in there maybe? Peace in your congregations. Okay, so that's what we mean by need. So in your congregation, you can't go it alone. You need a support group, and you need congregational practices that help institutionalize this work. So what I want to leave with you is just one practice you can take back now that you can do with your committees. You can have your board say, this is the way we're going to handle conflict. And you can also do it very stealthily during coffee hour. So here's the take-home tip, because it's all about practice. It's not about being up here. Is how do you handle complaints in your congregation? Because that's a source of conflict. It's triangulating. It's not going directly to the people involved. Translate everything into needs when you hear a complaint. So what's a common complaint in your congregation? That's why I'm down on the floor, so I can hear you. What's a common complaint that you hear in your congregation? And someone's going to have to tell me because I can't hear back there. Yes? Okay, lack of volunteers, burnout. Why do people burn out? What is the need behind that? When someone says, everybody in our congregation is burning out, what's the need behind that? Why are they saying that? Yes? They care for the people that are burning out, and they care for themselves. They want us to do well, well-being of other people. What might be another need behind that? A need for support. What else? Appreciation, ease, rest, sleep, spaciousness. Yes, what else? You're burnout because you're torn, because you want to be able to contribute. So let's try one more. Oh, did you have one other idea? So what's the need behind? That's a really strong, we're still not at the need level. If you're afraid your church is going to go down the tubes, what's the need behind that? Why do you want your church to do well? For self-care? What else? Why else do we want our congregation? Community? What else? Legacy. How true. To be heard, to be understood, to have meaning in our lives. And we want the flourishing of ourselves and other beings on this planet. We care, and we want our congregations to survive for the betterment of the world. So that's an example of how you deal with complaints. So let's try one more complaint. What's a common one we hear in our congregations? Yes, and speak up so I can hear. How would the complaint go in congregation? The board is asking for too much money. Why are we spending so much money? Have I got it yet? Okay. So what's the need behind that complaint? You're in coffee hour and someone tells you, you voted for that budget, we're spending too much money. What do you say back, translating it to universal human needs and desires? What's the need behind someone saying we're spending too much money? So safety is financial safety in this case, but safety, what else? You're not addressing my needs. I'm not being seen or heard. I really want to be heard and seen. So we put it in the positive. What else? I heard something here. Right, really wanting honesty, fairness, communication. Yeah, what else? So meeting the mission. So maybe integrity, accountability. Okay, so now you've got a tip of what to go back to your congregation. You can solve all your congregation's problems now by translating everything you hear into needs. But this can become a practice in your committee work and in your leadership, or even in your complaint process. Instead of just having a box going, that sermon was really bad, you can say what needs were met and what needs were not met. And part of this practice of translating everything into needs is to get immediate feedback. I just gave a sermon, what needs were met and what needs were not met for you. So that's what we do. And how am I doing on timing? A few more minutes?
Okay, you have a couple more
Okay.
minutes.
So what does this have to do with cross-cultural work? So I'm a wildlife veterinarian, so I'm going to do the science thing on you. All life pretty much evolved to move towards satisfaction or away from harm. Molecules, even at the level of molecules, that's what we do. And in many species, our emotions tell us to go towards something or away from something. We share that with most of life. We move away and we move towards. And one of the biggest threats in our lives are our own species. It always has been. We don't trust each other because we have hurt each other way back when we were great apes on the African savanna. So we have automatic impulses to say good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. We were born to judge and be Judge Judy. So if we want spaciousness around that decision of that knee-jerk reaction, you're good or you're not good for me, we have to practice. And that's what part of cross-cultural work is. We are afraid of the differences of moving away from our needs not being met, of the variety of needs that are out there. So it takes work and it takes practice to be able to remember, oh, they're doing it this way because they have a need just like I do. They just do it differently. So by translating everything into needs in a cross-cultural context, we go, oh, they're a biology life form like I am, moving away from harm and towards satisfaction. They're choosing a different way to doing it, but we have a common thread. Translate everything into needs. So a short story about that. When I was a minister serving the El Paso congregation, a young man from Honduras came to live with us, and we adopted him, and he was not much education. He was male. He was from a patriarchal country. He was evangelical Christians, and he was against GLBTQI folk. And we were vegan. So can you imagine? And I had lived in Central America, so I thought I was cool with this. But the arguments came. And he would sit there and flip through the Bible and tell us how we were wrong to be marrying transgender people. And my spouse and I are both ministers, and we'd be flipping through the Bible, going at it with him again. This man was physically abused as a child into his adulthood. He thought we were going to hit him. He brought the wounding of the world with him and all his cultural differences. So one day I told my spouse, I said, listen, we teach nonviolent communication. Why don't we try it at home? So we listened to him and translated everything he said into his needs. It's called empathy. And things settled down. He's still with us 12 years later. He's a citizen of the United States. He's married. He's a police officer. And my first grandchild is coming in September through him. I don't think if we hadn't switched to translating through needs in that very strenuous cross-cultural piece, we could not have found a way to have lived in peace these 13 years. So that's a testament to that. And then the last piece is, what has this got to do with covenant work? Now here's my idea on covenants. Covenants are not about the way other people in the congregation should be behaving. It's not a status of behavior of who's in and who's out. A covenant, for me, is an aspirational vision of the way I, as an individual, want to relate to life, of how I want to be in relationship to other people and to other beings on this planet. So I read the covenant and I affirm it every Sunday morning going, this is the way I want to live. So it's not to beat each other up with. It's a calling forth of our best selves, of being connected deeply to life even when our needs are not met. Because that sure happens in our congregations, doesn't it? So that's what this work has to do with covenants, this compassionate communication, is it helps you stay connected to life by knowing your needs and the needs of others so you can live as deeply and fully as possible. Doesn't mean you're going to feel comfortable, but it means you're going to feel everything and face the world for what it is and have more spaciousness for each other and yourself in conflict. And that's my speed course on nonviolent communication in UU congregations.
Thank you, LoraKim. Now, let me just ask if there's anyone in the audience who has a question. I think I see your hand up here. LoraKim, there's a question over here. You have time? I have time for the question, yes, so that we won't forget.
How do you check your assumption about their needs?
Yeah, how do you check your assumptions? You get feedback, you ask them. How was that for you? And if that's a pretty direct question, maybe you could guess. God, I'm really wondering if that was uncomfortable because you really want a sense of belonging right now. You just check in with them. Just look at their body, let it resonate in yours. And you may not understand the first meeting or the second meeting, but after a year of this, you'll begin to understand and feel where the other person's coming from. And hopefully they will from you. How was that? Check in with them. Feedback. Feed forward, really. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, LoraKim. Now let's move. Carlton, can you share with us?
Sure, I can. Like LoraKim, and thank you for that, LoraKim. I also have had experience with nonviolent communication that emerged in the context of a church conflict. How many of you know that churches can come into conflict with them? Yes, it's true. Me too. So in the midst of a church conflict at a congregation I was at that I refer to as a leadership crisis, there came a point where members of the staff were at loggerheads with one another, not able to communicate. And at that point, a facilitator came to work with us who was skilled in nonviolent communication and led us through the steps of nonviolent communication. We use nonviolent communication and compassionate communication interchangeably. I actually prefer compassionate communication as a term of reference to nonviolent communication because I feel like a little bit we recreate violence when we say nonviolence. And I'm wanting to see more compassion in the world. But just to give a quick overview of the four-part process of it, the first part is to make an observation without judgment. And LoraKim was just talking about judgment and how our tendency is to judge, but to make an observation without bringing judgment to it. To identify the feelings that come with that observation is the second part of it. The third part is the need that's behind the feelings, identifying and clarifying that the needs that is not being met is typically what it is. And then making a request that is beneficial to everyone who's involved. And that's the four parts of compassionate communication. And it sounds relatively simple to do, and for some folks it sounds rather formulaic, and it can be kind of awkward when you're learning like this new way of speaking. Marshall Rosenberg's book is called Nonviolent Communication: A Language of Life versus a Language of Death, I guess, if you will. And I appreciate that it is like learning a new language, and you become more fluent in it over time, and it becomes something that becomes more comfortable. And even though it's often the case that I don't use it in the moment that I find myself in a conflictual situation, but then I go back and think, okay, now if I applied the 4 steps of nonviolent communication to this, what would I say, in hindsight? The beauty part of belonging to a congregation is the opportunities to practice compassionate communication or nonviolent communication are continual. It's pretty much just show up in coffee hour, that's right there for you every minute, and in your personal life and in other situations that you find yourself in. So, and I'm also not an expert, but I have had the privilege of knowing enough to be able to facilitate for some congregations who are looking for ways to be in communication with one another better. And after, the typical workshop that I would do, at the end of it, or as part of it, we would create basically a practice session that any group can start for learning how to become more effective as people who communicate compassionately, people who communicate nonviolently. So that, I think, is a great benefit. And anyone in here who's part of a local community or not, we have the magic of the internet now, could create a practice community where one person would present a case or a situation and the rest of the group would figure out, how could we move this conversation forward in a nonviolent way? So I encourage you to consider that. I'm thinking about a couple of other concepts in that book as well that I found very helpful. Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. One of them is very important, and LoraKim pointed to it as well. It's about listening and the power of listening and listening very effectively. I think that's a relatively new concept if we're talking about new ways of being, because mostly when we're speaking or even when we're listening to other people, we're not really focused so much on what they're actually saying, but more focused on what we're going to say in response to what they're saying, so much so that often people are not able to finish their sentences because we're so much anticipating what we're going to say in response, or we're trying to put words in their mouth so that we can respond to like what we need to say back. But in a multicultural context, I think the real opportunity as far as listening is concerned is to be quiet sometimes for those of us who find ourselves in a relatively advantaged place inside of our very hierarchical culture, because we have hierarchies around gender, we have hierarchies around sexual orientation, around ethnicity, around nation of origin, all of those different ways. So if you find yourself in one of those positions where you've got relative advantage or power, the opportunity is to go silent. I know that many youth groups, when they're putting together their covenants, and even in adult groups as well, have a policy or the idea of stepping forward or stepping back. If you're someone who's used to taking up a lot of airtime and doing a lot of the speaking, maybe you could practice taking a step back and creating a space for other voices to come forward. If you're someone who, for a variety of reasons, tends to go inside and not speak forward and not to add your voice to the conversation, it's an opportunity for you to step forward and become more part of the conversation than you might be otherwise. In the setting in General Assembly, I think there's an opportunity, and we were just talking about it in the Black Lives Convening workshop or panel discussion that we just had. Throughout General Assembly, there's an opportunity for those of you who identify as white to create spaces for people of color's voices to emerge. So you can just look around and see if there's someone who's behind you who might be a person of color. Maybe you could take a step back and give that person an opportunity to step forward. If you notice that it's been all men coming up to the microphone and there's a woman who's third person behind, make the space for those voices to emerge, is a very powerful thing. I think one other thing that I would add from Marsha Rosenberg's work that I really appreciate is about how to give a compliment nonviolently. I know it sounds bizarre. How can a compliment be violent? Oh, Hope, you look so pretty today. Can you see can you see the violence in that? Can you see the judgment? It's it's a judgment of how she's looking, let alone the objectification that comes with, right? And it takes on a particular shade, if you will, in the context of a multicultural conversation where many of us are used to being in settings where we're inside of a white gaze, where we're constantly being judged based on our hair texture, our complexion, all our physical features, that these things are all constantly being lifted up into judgment. How can you be in relationship to someone in a way that's not a way of being judgmental? Why do we choose to comment on people's appearances in the first place? And why are we judging people's attributes? The way that I'm trying to govern myself when I'm talking about when I want to express appreciation to someone for something that they've done, I try to do it nonviolently. So I make an observation and I talk about the feeling that's associated with that and the need that gets met. So I might say to Hope, when I have a conversation with you, I feel inspired because you bring the fullness of yourself to the things that you engage in, and I appreciate it very much. And so that would be a way of communicating in a way that's non-judgmental, because it's about me and my experience, but it's not about me projecting my judgment onto Hope. So I think that's another way of the communication can be renewed. So really look for those opportunities when you have to say something that is life-giving to someone as a way of, even if you think it's like a compliment, right? Look to see if there's some judgment in there. And if there's not, see if you can sort of like rearrange it a bit to have it come out as something that is a affirmation and a sign of appreciation without that gaze of looking at someone and passing a judgment.
Thank you so much. I am feeling kind of pretty today, though. But I know exactly what Carlton is saying, and it happens so often to me as a leader within Unitarian Universalism. The belittling, it's everything you said just resonated, and that breaks my heart each time. But let's hear from Megan first, who's had some good experiences to share as well.
Yeah, coming at you from a different perspective, I don't know why you would know this, but Hope and I discovered this year that we both come from diplomat families, that both of our dads served diplomatic missions, hers in Jamaica and mine in the U.S., and we talked about a lot of commonalities that we experienced growing up overseas and a lot of different cultural immersion opportunities. And so when she asked me to be a part of this panel, I thought, well, gosh, although I use that kind of cross-cultural competency all the time, I'm not sure I think about it well enough to explain it to a bunch of UUs. What about my whiny 9-year-old experience could possibly be useful? But then I thought, well, I'll just trust Hope. And if my whiny 9-year-old experience is useful, I will share it with you. And I think it might be, because has anybody ever been really immersed in a culture that was just super different? I mean, some of you, that happens every day in Unitarian Universalism. So let's start with that. If you either find a cross-cultural experience being a Unitarian Universalist congregation all the time, or if you've also been somewhere where things were just totally different all the time, raise your hand. Okay. So when I was 8, my family moved from Oakland, California, which was a place that I had decided was normal, to Manila, Philippines, which was decidedly different. And so I, long story short, was immersed in a culture where almost every step I took was different than what I was expecting. And some of us have seen that iceberg chart with cultural differences, and below the level of the sea in the picture are all these things that you never really think about. It's not like different food. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But what about when everybody thinks about time differently? What about when everybody touches you as a white kid? That's a real flip, right? We talk a lot about touch in Unitarian Universalism. As a white child, I was touched all the time by strangers because my skin was so interesting. Right? Or what about, in my culture, if you like the food, you clear the plate, and that showed you liked it. That's being polite. In the Philippines, you show that you're full and that you've been satisfied by not clearing your plate. And if you do clear your plate, they're likely to bring you more food. And that's rude. And so as a child, I grew up in a world where every step I took was kind of unbalanced. I was never really sure until I learned, right? I was never really sure at first when I was doing the right thing and when I wasn't. And I think that decentralizing experience is actually pretty instructive to Unitarian Universalists, especially as we think about how do we decentralize the dominant culture that we've been experiencing, I think it's fair to say, and re-centralize some of the other cultures that we have. So how do you actually do that? Dun, dun, dun. That's what we're all here to learn, right? I think one of the ways that you do that is by acknowledging that difference exists on levels that you, swimming in your comfortable water, may never know, but you are probably surrounded by people who can point out when that dominant narrative isn't the most comfortable. It's not even that it's not working, but it's not the most comfortable. There's another option out there. And if the dominant culture can open their ears to that, then you get all sorts of interesting information about how things might be different or more comfortable for more people. I was in a training, again with Hope, some time ago. The days are running together, I think, at some point in the past, where we were shouting out things our people do. And one of the things I said is, my people work for the government. And our colleague Evan Carvel-Ziemer said, oh, I don't know anything about the culture of working for the government. And I had never thought about it before. But I know a lot about the culture of working for the government. First of all, you usually go home at 5 o'clock. almost always. In fact, they lock the door of the embassy after 5. You can't stay late. That's a lot different from the Washington, D.C. culture that I live in, where people are always overworking. So there's even that kind of difference, not even grand differences or the kind of common differences we frequently talk about in these General Assembly workshops, but even the tiny differences. If you can find enough space for hearing about those differences, then you can make space for those differences to have a part in your conversation. And not only is that more welcoming and more fair, but it enriches your understanding of those folks and yourself. Because I didn't know either that government had a culture that I know about. And so learning that taught me a little bit about my people in a way that felt really good. So that's kind of the whiny 9-year-old version of what I have to share with you all today. And happy to discuss more of it as time goes by.
So what I want us to think about in terms of leadership and leadership development, how do we approach conflict? How do we identify when there is actually conflict? How do we deal with it? What is your relationship to conflict? How do you handle it? And how has your faith informed how you deal with conflict? Unitarian Universalism. We heard LoraKim use the word triangulation, and when people triangulate, what do you do when someone comes up and whispers to you, oh, I'd like to get rid of so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so? What do you do when a new minister has come in and maybe decided, I really, really hate joys and sorrows. We're getting rid of this. And the triangulation begins when someone says, well, we're getting rid of her. How do you deal with conflict? So I'd like you to just huddle up, maybe 2, 3. Just go meet with a neighbor. And here's the example that I will give you. New ministers coming in. Looks like me. Looks like me. Gets rid of joys and sorrows within the first 3 weeks. And how do you begin to deal with it if you love joys and sorrows and you don't particularly have faith in me and my leadership? How would you even begin to deal with it? So that's one way that I would invite you to just begin a little brief conversation that will help you to identify how you handle conflict. Just huddle up, a couple people at a time, and talk. I mean, if you love joys and sorrows, change the metaphor. So we're going to wind down now because I think that it's important for us to share some of the learning. So I'm going to invite you to use a microphone so that we can hear. It was really hard to hear from the very back. So the questions again were, what do you like about the way you handle conflict? What would you like to change about your relationship to conflict? How has your faith informed how you deal with conflict? And in terms of the matter of conflict, LoraKim, how did you phrase that? What's it like for you and in terms of your congregation? The difference between conflict on a personal level and conflict as a leader, let us say, in a congregation. So you talked, and there was a big buzz in the room. Let's some brave soul or souls come on up and share a little bit about what you heard, and try to say it nonviolently if you can. Can we do this? Sure we can.
Just the start of it was what need is being met by removing joys and sorrows. And we talked a little bit about that there are needs on both sides. And that generally the congregation has the need of community and sharing, whereas the minister might have the need of, it's a wild card in planning service. Mm-hmm. And, have that conversation between the minister and a good representation of the congregation, and which need really does the congregation hold up higher. And that's where you get the a better understanding, and people wouldn't triangulate and say, well, the minister did this for whatever reason. So.
Thank you. Come on up. One thing.
I was saying that to my partner, if I was really honest with myself, I would not approach you. I would not want to. I'd be hesitating because I have to be nice. Because I'm from a dominant culture, therefore I need to be nice and not rock the boat. And that would be my initial thought. And then the next thought is, no, that is BS because that doesn't respect either of us.
Right.
And so to get to that next section, and I think that was something that was really positive within it, is to recognize that dominant and then to step back.
So then a question I have for you, and I appreciate that, because I did go out of my way to say someone who looks like me.
Yes.
Would it have made a difference if it had been someone who looks like Megan or LoraKim?
Okay. I would hate to admit it. It would.
Yeah.
Internally. But that's not where it stops.
Great.
The question is, do I step? So internal's one thing, and then stepping is another. And I would step forward rather than stay in that knee-jerk reaction.
What's your name?
Amy.
I love your integrity. Thank you.
Thanks.
Come on up.
Farrell Masters from the UU congregation of Greenville, North Carolina. And one of the things we all agreed was that you need to make sure that the person with the authority and responsibility is the person who responds, because all too often it may not have been the minister who decided that. I found when I was president, everybody thought I was the one who made decisions, and I'd have to say, no, you need to talk to the DRE or so-and-so. So it's not, as somebody said, playing telephone, so things get garbled. And the other thing I found is important for me when I'm dealing with things is to try to do it one-on-one, so you don't get 5 people converging on somebody to ask, why are we doing this? So you have to try to catch it early if you can.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. What role does cross-cultural competency have in conflict transformation? When there's an issue, even if there's not someone who looks like me in the mix, how do you bring in a cross-cultural sensibility? For example, board meetings start 7:30 p.m. You want to attract new members to your board. Some are younger, some have little kids and have to do homework and get them to bed. Is that a cross-cultural consideration for you when you think of the generations and you think, well, can you change your board meeting time? Becomes a cross-cultural decision. Are you going to make space for the younger people you're trying to attract with the kids so that they can't make 7:30 p.m. board meetings? It's remembering to bring in that cross-cultural sensibility and lens and try to work it through all that you are trying to do. It doesn't have to be obvious, black and white. It could be little things, morning people, evening persons, night owls. I remember I went as a leader. I had just joined the UUMA board, the UU Ministers Association board. And I got a knock. The meeting was starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm not a morning person, neither am I a breakfast eating kind of person. Therefore, I would rather sleep until much closer to the time the meeting starts. At 8 o'clock, at 1 minute past 8, I get a knock on the door. Hope, are you okay? Yeah, sure, I'm okay. Why? Well, we're waiting to have breakfast. Well, I don't need breakfast. Well, it's part of the meeting. That was for me a cross-cultural light bulb going off deer in headlights while I was still sleeping. How am I going to be a leader if I don't even understand the way things work? Therefore, it means telling people what they need to know. And it means thinking things through from a perspective that is not necessarily your own. Because if you're a morning person, well, of course everybody is going to be up and running at 8 o'clock. But for me, it just, but guess what? There was a judgment put on me. Oh, people who look like Hope are always late. Well, I wasn't late. I was getting there for 1 minute to 9 without breakfast. And so just in terms of thinking, in terms of the judgment, Carlton, it means expanding your imagination, talking with others to think about all of the cues you might be missing, the cues you might be giving out that comes from your dominant place in the world or in the lineup in terms of the leadership. So over the years that I was serving on that board, I understood the language. I understood the way to be. So I told the new members that were coming in some of this cross-cultural stuff because I had had to live it in order to be accepted. So many times I've been asked, well, Hope, you don't look like a minister. I get that. I'm kind of funky. But to be told in Unitarian Universalism that I don't look like a minister kind of feels a little bit different. Have you been told ever? You don't look like you might say to some friends, I'm going to General Assembly, you tell them what it's all about. Oh my goodness, you don't look religious. What does that mean? Jean, come to the mic. I see your hand is up. But what does that mean? You don't look. What does all of that mean? Jean Lloyd, my friend.
Well, I'm a woman. How can I be a minister?
Speak up.
I'm a woman. How can I be a minister? Or, well, that actually probably stops right there. I'm not sure what else. I was only identifying a little bit. And then they ask, well, what's a Unitarian Universalist?
Well, that's a bigger question. But it's important to be able to understand these little nuances. LoraKim, come on up and add something here for me. It's important for each of us to recognize who we are as members of the congregations, the communities we serve, in terms of our roles as religious professionals or not, to be really conscious. I live in a zone where I'm always presente in the moment, and yet there's a little Hope up there always looking down and trying to assess the situation. It is not a good thing, but it is a part of my survival. Can you just say a little something about what you forgot?
We were just having a conversation up here about maybe how challenging work with cross-cultural and conflict is, and maybe I'll say my piece after you share what you said you forgot in your piece.
Well, I meant to say the reason why it's whiny is because I found it so exhausting to always be unsure of what I was doing. And so we were saying, we want to make sure that you don't try it the one time, get real tired, and then say, well, this isn't worth the effort, because it's going to take some patience and some effort and some practice, and a lot of self-care, LoraKim was saying. So just know that going in.
Yeah, so here's a self-care practice in cross-cultural work or in conflict work. It's self-empathy, which means being curious about what I'm feeling and needing. Other empathy is going, oh, I'm curious about what you're feeling and needing. And that's how you pick up clues in a cross-cultural context. So what's an example of an uncomfortable cultural impact in our congregations? What's an example? Okay, so God does have a different culture. It's true. That's very true. Okay, so what side are you on? Can we role play just for a little bit? What side would you be on that conversation?
I'm more
Microphone.
Okay, so he says, I'm more, there's a mic, I'm more a theist, and I'm going, oh man, I'm really, really humanistic. Let's just say that. Okay.
I come out of going to Sunday school and reading the Bible, the King James Version.
Okay, so here I am. Here's my internal dialogue. I'm just going to make this up. Not too much, but I'm going to make it up, going, I grew up in that church. They told me women couldn't be ministers. My father said I was a bad person because I didn't read the Bible. I don't want to hear that stuff. Okay, there's my internal conversation. Here's the self-empathy piece. If I'm me, what am I feeling? What feelings did you all pick up from my internal conversation?
Disrespect.
No, that's not a feeling. I want an emotion. What was I? Anger, anxiety, what else? Presence?
Threatened.
Oh, insecure. Yeah, okay. Okay, so all those work. Okay, now what is my need behind that? What feeling? It's that feeling's telling me mostly to get away. So what's my need there?
Love.
Love? Well, that's true. It's like a basic one, love. But what else? Pardon me? Safety? Yes. Strong need there. Affirmation? Yes. Acceptance? Huge. Respect. Also, connection. I'm losing connection here. Okay, so here's the self-empathy piece. Imagine you're me, and the phrase is, when you're challenged like this in a cross-cultural perspective, your sentence to yourself is, no wonder I'm feeling blank. So the first word I heard was, no wonder I'm feeling anger. I really need, safety came up here. So my sentence is, no wonder I'm angry. I really long for safety. So that's my tip for self-care. You can do it anywhere, at any time, and when you're triggered, breathe, maybe step back, and say, no wonder I'm angry. I really need safety. And then maybe I can come back and go, I'm guessing that you're feeling a little uncomfortable too because you really long for connection in this congregation. Is that right?
Yes.
See how easy it is? Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions before we continue? Could you either shout it out real loud or come to the mic, please?
Sure.
Okay, so Carlton is going to repeat his 4 points.
Right. So the 4 components of nonviolent communication are, first, to make an observation without judgment. Second, to identify the feeling associated with that observation. Third, to identify the need behind the feeling. And fourth, to make a request that's beneficial to everyone involved. So, I'll give you an example. This would be an example of violent communication. LoraKim, I can't believe that you were 15 minutes late to the workshop. You know the workshop started at 4 o'clock, and we were waiting for you, and Hope was getting nervous, and so we were very upset behind that. So I'm just really upset. Okay, so that's a violent communication. It's like blaming and shaming and guilting and all of that stuff. So if I were to say that non-violently, I would say, LoraKim, when you arrived in the workshop room 15 minutes late, 15 minutes at 4, okay, I'll try, thank you, good. When you arrived at, I don't know, is that judgment? I think if you're...
Late is a judgment word.
Okay, late is a judgment word, but I'm saying that if you, okay, I'll take the judgment out. I got it. Got it. I'm practicing, as you can see. When you arrived at 4:15 for our workshop that started at 4 o'clock, That was good, right? I felt anxious because I wanted to be sure, because I need for everyone in the room to have the fullness of the time. I want people to know that we respect their time. I need for people to know that. So my request is that if you know in the future that you are going to be arriving at a time other than the time that is expected, that you would notify one of us first so that we can plan accordingly. Is that something that you might be willing to do? Check. Okay, so you got that. So we had to work it out to get to that observation without judgment, right? That took a minute. Okay. That's good too. So how would you say it differently?
Please, one second. Could you please use the mic so that everyone can hear what you're trying to say? It's really interesting.
No, it's great conversation. Yeah.
Well, of course, I was parsing everything you were saying right down to the T. But when I heard you mention the word "respect the time," I went immediately to her feelings of he's accusing me of not respecting other people's time. I think my first reaction would be to ask the person why they were coming at that time. I don't know if that, because it would be very different if the person said, I wanted to stop and get a cup of coffee, as opposed to, I just had a traffic accident. So
your judgment of that would be different.
Yes, exactly. There is judgment involved.
But come back, please. So help us then. So that's a valid observation. That's a judgment. I just made a judgment. That's a valid observation. I'm very interested in this conversation. So what would you say as an alternative to the piece that I said about respect that would be non-judgmental or less judgmental?
I don't know if I would just say, we can cover the whole agenda today. We're trying to gather everybody at a certain time, and then go on to say, if you know you can't be here, could you let us know so we know whether to start the meeting or not? Would that be non-judgmental?
My perspective is that is closer to what I was aiming for in terms of nonviolent communication, because I can see where that interjecting is sort of like you're being disrespectful, which is sort of like the undertone, right, of the whole respect conversation. It's like, that helped me. Thank you. And Janice Marie has something to share. Yeah.
Janice Marie Johnson, and time is something that I struggle with culturally. So the 15 minutes, well, either you're early or you're late. But when I heard you speaking, no matter how gently you spoke, I still got, he's pissed off with me because I'm late. I still heard that. And so I think if it were my meeting, I would say, Carlton, I was worried about you. Are you okay? That would be my first question. Mm-hmm. And then I'd wait for you to sort of let me know whether you were in fact okay. And because that would be my first concern, unless you were habitually late. What happened? Something may have gone wrong. And then you would say, whatever, and I would just take what you would tell me. I think you'd tell me something. I'm okay. And the then question would be, do you notice that you're 15 minutes late? And I wouldn't ask you that question. I'd just say, okay, glad to know that you're okay. I guess we can start now. And I would have a private one-on-one conversation with you afterwards, or that night I'd call you, text you, and say, we really need to start on time. And as I think about it, I wouldn't just text you. I would text the whole group and say that my expectation for all of us, including myself, is that we start on time and end on time. That's what I would do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Janice Marie. And we're actually inside of a compassionate communication practice session right now. I mean, no, that's nothing to apologize for. I'm just saying that we're doing, this is the work. I mean, and there's not any right or wrong answers. It's just the practice. And there's some different,
I guess I feel I would approach it differently and say, it's important to me to start our meetings on time, and I find it bothers me when I don't know where people are and I don't know whether to start or wait. And I would appreciate it if you could find a way to let me know whether I should wait or should go on without you.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have an observation.
Yeah.
And the observation is that all of these parsing shows how difficult this work is. Because I hear each person and say, no, that feels shaming. No, that feels blaming. And that's difficult work that we have to do. And I want to honor that difficult work. And we're not always easy doing it well. Yeah.
If I can say one thing to that.
Sorry? Don't mean to turn back.
The only person that knows whether you're carrying judgment, energy, or blaming is inside yourself. You are the only one that knows. So even if you are totally in love with the world and the person and you're ready to hear a no and it's all great, that person, due to the wounding and our cultural practices, is going to feel shame and anger. Even if it's not coming from you. This is the difficulty of the work. One is because usually we are shaming and angry.
Yep.
That's part of it. And if we don't think we are, our body remembers all the bad things.
In the tone.
The tone and so. But even if we're perfectly arrived, be ready for that person to jump all over you and hear it because they are. And that's why we need the self-care work, because you're going to get that back when you're honest with people.
Thank you. You said that so much more eloquently than I did.
I could only say it because you did, so thank you.
Yeah, and I just add to that, there's something, too, to be said about, just being grounded in one's own experience and to keep coming back to that. It's just so easy to get caught up in what we're projecting onto other people, which I think was LoraKim's point, but how do we stay grounded in a way and centered? And what I would say is that there's always an opportunity to come, back around, even if one has been misunderstood initially. I mean, so even in this exchange that we're having, it's not about, I'm more concerned with trying to communicate effectively and as clearly as possible what I'm trying to get across without the judgment and to move the conversation forward. So that's what my commitment is. So I'm going to keep coming back around that until we get to a place where we are seeing, the same thing and holding the same things in our hearts. So, thank you.
Not to you, Amy. You can sit down. Sorry to make it. It's like you're trapped. Unfortunately, when we have these conversations, I think it's not usually the first time. We can't erase the history or the dominant culture norms when we have these conversations. Like the time thing for me particularly is interesting because, growing up in the Philippines, and my mother's American and has a Filipino mindset when it comes to time. So it wasn't like something I could get away from. But I have like a super anal, dominant culture American response to time, to the point where, how parties, they say come at 7, but that's not what they mean. I have to get my husband to tell me, can you just tell me what the time is that we're supposed to be there? Because I don't understand the ish at all. But so we already, that's just an example of how in the U.S., you wouldn't have a conversation where you do. In the Philippines, you rarely have a conversation where the exact number 400 is really at play. You would never really have a conversation where someone comes up and says, well, you said 4 and I said 4:15, and how are we going to negotiate a reality between those two things? Because those two times are pretty much the same. So, but that's so not true in most U.S. cultures that when I'm feeling my best sympathetic self towards my mother, I realize that, she's having to negotiate this whole thing the whole time. She doesn't see any difference between 4 and 5, frankly. But you can't have a conversation with her about time without all of that background and all of the pressures of the dominant culture coming into play, and that's what she's already hearing by the time you even open your mouth about what time it is. And that's real. And so for me, it helps to acknowledge it up front when you're playing with some dominant stuff.
And of course, coming from Jamaica, if you get there at 4, you're kind of being a little bit disrespectful because you're not giving people time to get ready for you to get there. Anyway, please take the microphone. You've been waiting so long.
Thank you. I believe that words have power, and there's a phrase that is used so often in our language, and it's one-on-one. I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with you. One-on-one is a power position. I'm in power. I'm going to have a conversation with someone who is beneath me in power. A one-to-one conversation allows for equanimity. I will learn from you. You will learn from me. We will come together. So it's one of my goals in life is to have that language shifted.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi. I just have so many thoughts, but I wanted to clarify one thing. When you talk about the second step, I think it is the second, of identifying the feeling, you're really focusing on your own feelings,
yes.
Right?
That's the only one you can focus on.
Right, absolutely, because you're the only, I can only know what my feelings are. Yeah. I recently had in my congregation a very horrible sort of conflict, right, come up. And I don't really know what I did wrong. This person has a lot of issues, obviously. So what do you do to try to keep yourself emotionally centered and not judge, but also not psychoanalyze that person? Because I found myself wanting to do that. And, all of this, she was pushing buttons, she didn't realize maybe she was pushing buttons, but she was behaving in some ways like, my family of origin, and it was really hard. And my need was, I just want to get away, I just want to get out of here. And it was really hard to stay compassionate and try to be kind and sympathetic when this person is essentially attacking me. Now, what are your thoughts?
What do you want to do, like a little tiny thing? Would you like to inhabit the person of this person that you're talking about? Just give us like a little taste of that. Yeah.
You want me to role play?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh gosh. I didn't tell you that. And I called you out in a board meeting because you don't listen. You hurt a lot of people in this congregation. You are a very talented person, but you don't realize how much you hurt people.
So what I'm here, and I'm going to go like I'm going to see if I can do nonviolent communication, not necessarily according to the script, but we'll see if things fall together. So I hear that you are upset. And can you give an example of a time that I hurt someone? Have I hurt you?
Well, no. It's a series of trivial little things that have happened over time. Trivial. But, it's built up.
It's built up. So what I want to do is I'm really committed to our congregation being a thriving place where people have the experience of love and generosity and affection. So if there is an opportunity, if you notice that I'm hurting someone, if I've hurt you, would you be willing to help me see that and acknowledge that? Would that be something you would be willing to do?
I have difficulty with conflict.
Okay.
And collaboration. I cannot. I have teamwork. No, I can't.
I understand. Okay. Well, is it possible that we might have a time where we might go deeper into the conversation than we might be able to right now?
No, I've had enough.
Enough? Okay.
I did get that.
Well, it's exactly that. And this is the thing. It's like I'm going to make it personal. I can't control other people's responses to me.
Yeah.
They're going to feel the way they're going to feel. They're going to say what they have to say. And what I can do is, at best, and this is, a spiritual learning that I got from my seminary training. My colleagues, I think, had similar, several colleagues in the room, to be a non-anxious presence. So how do you remain self-differentiated and allow people to have their feelings over there for themselves and not get sucked into, taking all of that onto yourself? There's a lot of upset. There's a lot of rage. Yeah. But just because she's upset doesn't mean that you have to be upset. And just because she's hating on you doesn't mean you have to hate on you. So I think that's the thing that I try to hold for myself, for one thing. And LoraKim's got some
And one
stuff
last
as well.
thing for your answer. What do I do? How do I be nice and kind and stay engaged? This work isn't about being nice.
Thank you.
It's not about being engaged. It doesn't mean you have to like everybody and want to help them.
Or take abuse.
Or take abuse. What it means is I'm aware of my feelings and needs, so I have the greatest choice to do least harm in the world. So in your case, I don't know, the best choice might have been to leave the room and do least harm. You don't have to be nice or like anybody. You just, the spiritual calling is to be present to the needs and feelings in life. Okay? Thank you.
Latifah Woodhouse from the Shelter Rock congregation. It's wonderful the way you all talk and you approach, but it's a very complicated, difficult matter when you come from different cultures and not have the understanding. For example, Hope's example of being late, what late meant to me being brought up in Afghanistan, and what late means to being in America and being part of my Shelter Rock board is a very different concept. I personally believe, as a teacher, as an educator, that there has to be a lot of work done cross-culturally in that area where we're all human. We want to be accepted and to be part of the circle. And by these little comments or whispering or, like what Hope was saying, the example of the little Hope up there. Because when people reject you and they make those kind of, I personally hold it, I'm sensitive and it bothers me until I have that one-to-one communication and to really clear the lines of the communication to see why am I treated differently. I am a human like you. I want to be loved and accepted. I want to be part of the circle. If there's something that I'm not doing right, please let's work with me, but don't criticize me and don't whisper and don't say like, she shouldn't be part of this board because you know what, she was late 2 or 3 times and it's hard. It really is hard. I wish there was a magic wand that we could just think. But LoraKim, you were in our congregation and you did a wonderful workshop and one of the leadership workshop. I would like more of that kind of teaching and instructions among UU circles.
Thank you.
Yes. We have to go into fast forward, so I know you can speak fast.
Whoa, okay. Thank you for going into the C word. That I think that some part of our UU culture has a real hard time with conflict. And I am attempting to take parts of our culture and meld it into the culture I grew up in by planting a new Unitarian Universalist congregation in a new dominant culture, south of I-20 in the African American community of Atlanta. And I deliberately said what I did about dominant culture because I'm changing the definition of that word from what we typically use it as. Because the dominant culture in my mother's home was her culture. So time is cultural, and so sometimes at workshops, I'm very explicit about I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. We are going to use white Republican time for your 5-minute break. Because there's gay time, there's drag queen time, there's, there's all sorts of time, and there's all sorts of conflict. And so I grew up in a culture where conflict was dealt with in a very different way than in Unitarian Universalism. And I'm curious about if there's some guidance, some wisdom, because I'm taking this strange animal, Unitarian Universalism, which, by the way, was 2 different cultures.
Oh, yeah.
We have ignored one, but it's 2 different cultures, and I'm taking it into yet a different culture where they don't know us.
Thank you, Duncan. Please. We're going to take the questions and keep them with us because we're running out of time. We've run out of time, so we want to hear the questions.
My name is Marcus. I'm from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Peoria, Illinois. And I had a question about, I get the language and using the language, but one of the things that I have a problem with that I don't often know that I'm doing is my facial expressions. Do you have any suggestions on how to kind of make it look like you're not judging someone?
What a great question. And let's just get this last question so that we can weave them together.
I just wanted to mention that in order to practice nonviolent communication, there has to be communication. And so I wanted to mention another tool that we found useful in our congregation, which is mutual invitation, assuring that each person is explicitly invited to talk by the next person. There's a whole procedure to it, and it's outlined by, I believe it's Eric Law.
Yes.
And it's we don't want the loudest voice in the room to be the decision maker. Right. We don't want the person who isn't speaking up to not be heard.
Thank you.
And so it's important that you do not conduct your business meetings like a business person would, because our business is building community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you had the last word there. Can we remember the questions that we heard? We'll do a little huddle outside and get to the answers, but we have to honor the time. Can you remember all that we shared? We up here on the panel, you down there. It was a conversation. The idea of a workshop just didn't work for me. It has been a rich conversation, and please continue the dialogue when you go back to your congregations and your communities, and thank you for coming. And thank you.